Afternoon, it's Matthew Holt. I am the head of the THCB gang. You reach the THCB gang. It is episode 48, March the 26th. We're on Friday today, a rare miss from our usual Thursday time. We'll be back on Thursday next week, but Friday, and I got a fun lineup today. I will show you who they all are. Smaller than usual, but as one or two of the wags on earlier said, don't worry, if it's just a couple of us, we can still probably go long. Right, so who's on today? Kim Bellard, freaking contributor and writer on THCB. Mike Magee, also a freaking THCB contributor. Got a great piece coming out next week. Medical historian. Jen Benz, always great to have Jen on. Queen of everything to do with employer benefits and communications at Siegel Benz, and digital health guru for Johnmar from Enspektos. So, hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well and having fun. It's been in the digital health world quite a week, but I'm thinking the real world has also been quite a week. So, tell me how you're all. Tell me how you're all doing, how you're all feeling, and what you've all been seeing. So, let me start with you, Kim.
Well, while most people are watching what's going on at the federal, I've been paying some attention to the states recently. So we had Georgia on the one hand doing voter suppression blatantly in front of everybody, arresting people that protested. In Ohio, the legislature just overrode the governor's veto of the bill that would allow the assembly to basically override any public health emergencies and substitute their judgment for public health judgment. And at the same time, they're introducing bills, despite the mass shootings in Atlanta and Boulder. They want to allow concealed carry with no permits. Talk about reading the room wrong. But fortunately, in Wyoming, the House there has passed the bill allowing for Medicaid expansion, which I understand now has to go to the Senate. But that's a huge shift in Wyoming politics. So
yeah, they've clearly, yeah, they've clearly decided to take the money. And I think was it Montana where there was a ballot initiative to expand Medicaid? I don't know if it actually happened yet. But there was recent. So we are creeping towards those 12 states, to get expansion. The big ones, Florida and Texas, I guess, are not going to come for a while. Mike, what have you been up to?
Well, as with Kim, I've noticed this week that it was kind of a week of reawakening. You know that in the Biden news conference, the one subject that was not raised was COVID. And yet at the same time, we got issues of racism with Jim Crow laws, as Kim mentioned. You've got not one, but two mass shootings, again, unaddressed by the Senate. And you have the Senate itself, which is now totally out of sync with citizen majorities who are looking for action on things like guns and voting rights, and basically ignoring their own constituents. So, about 2 years or so ago, I made a prediction that if you look at history over a period of time, the absence of incremental change and the reinforcing of status quo eventually does catch up. And what happens when it finally catches up is that the reformers leapfrog over several steps and get way ahead of the status quo. So the two steps I'm watching most closely is number one, throw his weight behind dropping the filibuster, because you've got to get voter rights passed in order to get in any way in line with the citizenry. And the second thing is, I would look over the next weeks, really, for reemergence of Medicare for All as a serious issue, both on the basis that we certainly are no better off in cost control. There certainly is as much concern about pharmaceutical costs as there have ever been. And in addition to that, if you want to address cultural change in terms of inequity, in terms of income equality, in terms of getting people back into safety and security when they're out of the job, the quickest way to do that is through healthcare. So I think healthcare is going to become a vehicle that Biden even though he says he's not interested at all in some of the more radical approaches. I don't think he's going to be satisfied to stop with expansion of Medicaid to these 12 southern and western states. I think he's going to leapfrog and go farther.
All right, bold prediction there from Mike. We'll see how it comes. Okay, Jen, what have you been up to the last couple of weeks, and what do you think is going on?
Well, all those topics that have been keeping the headlines busy and that we've been seeing in the external media are having a big impact on the workplace also. And that's my world, figuring out how employers help get their people engaged in healthcare and well-being and so forth. And it's just so interesting to me how different the conversations that are happening inside large workplaces and small workplaces in the US are as a direct result of the racial awakening we all had as a country last year. So can you imagine a few years ago, CEOs commenting on a mass shooting and talking about the white supremacist undertones of it, and some of these topics that are now just common in the dialogue in workplaces, and that's just amazing to me. And it's really changing so many expectations of what people have from their workplace, and I think it's the potential for tremendous change. So that's been keeping me very occupied, even among the dialogue happening within my own team. I have a team of about 65 people. And then the other thing, I think the headline was probably missed by lots of folks, but Oakland is going to do an experiment with basic income, similar to what happened in Stockton. And that's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. And I think that's starting very, very quickly.
That's interesting. I had missed that. So basic income at a city level, how's that going to work?
Yeah, they're doing a small group trial similar to what Stockton has done. So it's certainly not a citywide effort, but they have garnered funding, part of it from foundations and part of it from the city, to basically ask the question, what happens if we just start to give people a little bit of extra cash to make their lives better? And then they're going to follow those families and those individuals and see, does it help them be more productive and happy and healthy, or does it do the things that are kind of the false myths out there about, oh well, you're going to give people money and they're just going to stop working, or things along those lines. And I'm of course not showing my bias there at all.
The false myth. If you give me some more money, I'll happily stop working. I bought a lottery ticket last night, and if that one comes in, maybe the end of the THCB gang. Fard, it's I don't know what you were going to say about, but if you don't, I'll comment on this. It's been a hell of a week and a half for digital health, I tell you that. So what have you been noticing?
Right. So, I've been noticing the same things that everybody else has been talking about. I think it just feels like the country is undergoing some fundamental changes in how people have thought about things for a long time. You have conversations about social justice and racial justice, on the headlines. You have, I think from an economic perspective, this whole idea of trying to tighten the gap between the very well off and those who are not is becoming an urgent, a really urgent cause for a lot of folks in terms of animating the conversations around everything from the filibuster to the recent stimulus bill. So that I've been paying attention, of course, to obviously the headlines in digital health, and we continue with some of these large funding rounds. I was just looking at Bigfoot Biomedical, that I know that you guys were focused on, because some of the things they're doing with automated insulin delivery and what's happened because of COVID has been really big. So obviously, this continues to ripple around digital health. But I think back to the issue of the fundamentals, we have fundamental conversations about voting rights. We have fundamental conversations about racial equity. We have fundamental conversations about healthcare and economics. And I think it's going to be very interesting over the next few weeks as to how those conversations then turn from conversations into action. So Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, when you look at what Biden has been started talking about, right? He started talking about infrastructure and climate change, which are obviously connected in terms of, his goal of pushing out electric vehicles and changing the way that we do power generation. And we've had Texas, don't forget, in the last, within this year, there's, the evidence that we need a new infrastructure and that can survive climate change. We're just basically getting on with life. 111 people died in that storm. So that's one. Voting rights, obviously. Anything else on healthcare, whether it's, what he said in the campaign, which was expanding Medicare to people 60 and older and doing a public option. There's a bunch more stuff that needs to be done. And clearly, if the senators from West Virginia and the senators from the junior senator from senior senator from West Virginia and junior senator from Arizona, it's unclear where they all are on the filibuster, but obviously nothing's going to pass. And then back on the table after a year of everyone being inside is gun control. Right? So you have these 4 or 5 big issues, and we know that nothing's going to happen if the filibuster stays as is. And so I think we'll have to see how Pelosi and to some extent Schumer work their magic on this, but with Biden coming in. But I think you're right. We're going to see in the next 2 to 3 months whether anything else happens, or it doesn't sound like Biden particularly is happy to sit back on the stimulus package and say we're done. Which is
Biden just appointed Joe's wife to the Appalachian Planning Commission. So certainly that is enough for his votes, right?
Well, don't forget, right? The ACA got passed because of the Cornhusker kickback, and there was one other as well. There was the Nebraska. I mean, the fact that there was a Democratic senator from Nebraska, given what we know about in the middle of the country, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, blows my mind. But anyway. All right. So I have one thing I want to chuck in for what I've seen this week, which is a bit more health policy nerdy, but I think helps lead into some of the conversations. So I'm with Thad. I mean, doing the Health in 2.0 show with Jess DeMassa, this last week had the biggest deals ever, right? $500 million for Roe to sell you drugs online, multiple $150, $200 million deals in the data analytics space, in the mental health space, in the Ginger for mental health, also in the navigation space. And then you had a big merger between Grand Rounds, which is an employer sort of navigation company, a bit competing with Accolade and others, and with one of the big telehealth companies, Doctors on Demand. So, there's a ton going on there, which indicates sort of change in the health system. But I also wanted to pick up on something that Dan O'Neill tweeted about, which I hadn't noticed, which is the Massachusetts Health Policy Commission. Who knew there was such a thing, but there is, had really interesting presentations, and they tweeted them all out just a couple of days ago. And one of them was looking at some of the data regarding the impact of high deductible health plans on people in Massachusetts. So Jen, back to your world, obviously there are more and more people, apparently now 30% of people in Massachusetts, as opposed to just under 20 a few years ago, have a high deductible health plan. And it's exactly what you'd expect. People who have more chronic illness, have lower incomes, have more issues with lower incomes, general percentage of poverty, have more problems with healthcare costs if they have a high deductible health plan than if they don't, which is not a massive surprise. And I unearthed a 2006 transcript that I have on the healthcare blog by the late great Uwe Reinhardt, which I tweeted out, which I must put back on the front page because it's so good. Basically, where he went down the line of why a high deductible health plan matters so much more if you're, making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year rather than if you're making, a couple of $100,000 a year. And why really we're simply in that case balancing the back of, saying that we're going to deal with healthcare costs by by empowering consumers to pay more, which only really matters for people who have lower incomes and obviously more issues with the healthcare system. A wonderful piece. The video accompanying it was quite brilliant, and it's disappeared off the web, but I'm hopefully going to recover it. So, in all of that, and that's a lot of messy stuff I said, and I want to go back to you, Jen. Just from the people you work with on the employer side, how many of them have put, and I'm not talking about sort of, moderately well-off people like some of us, but, people of average means, the sort of 40 to 50 40, 50, 60K a year families, middle income groups. How many of those employers have put them into the high deductible health plan category? how do you go about explaining it? And what's the kind of impact and feedback that they get about that? I mean, where are the employers you work with in that zone?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a huge variety of employers and other types of plan sponsors like big state health plans and so forth. So there's a huge range. But the high deductible health plan plus HSA or plus HRA is the dominant plan design that has been being put forward for the last 15, 16, 17 years, for a long time. I mean, we started talking about HRAs and HSAs back in 2002 to 2005 when they were first introduced. And it's taken a long time to learn what does work with them. And then for a long time, we've known that there are these unintended consequences with them that often get pushed to the side. So even among workforces that have very highly paid people, high deductible health plans are hard for folks to understand. We do a ton of education about them. If you are highly paid, the HSA is actually really awesome because you get to put aside all of this money tax-free, and then it grows, and it's basically like a supercharged 401k. But it really is a great tax advantage for high earners already. And it does not do anything to help the lower wage folks. So there are plan designs that employers who are aware of this adopt. And the most common ones of those are fully funding the deductible or almost fully funding the deductible, so that you have someone in a high deductible model, but they are essentially being given the money for their deductible as an employer contribution to the HSA. So that helps prevent some of that. Or what we're seeing more and more are salary-based pricing schemes for healthcare plans, which I think is a very humane and human way to go about pricing healthcare within employer populations. So there are efforts to correct for some of that, but in general, it's been a myth that people keep selling, that having consumers more engaged in their healthcare is going to somehow reform some of these fundamental issues with the system, which is just not happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, before I go to you, Mike, just want to say the great thing Uwe said, which was when he delivered the line, it was hysterical, was that, you know, he actually went, so at that time, the people pushing this was the National Center for Policy Analysis, John Goodman, based in Dallas, Texas. And he said, so he went to Dallas, Texas, he looked up on health insurance, the cost of a low, high deductible plan that a waitress or somebody making a low income might buy. And the deductible, I mean, the cost was, a couple $100 a month, whatever back then, and the deductible was $10,000 even back then. And he said, she's making $30,000-$40,000 a year. You cannot pretend that the $10,000 deductible means the same to her as it does to, say, for instance, a member of Congress. So he said the answer here is that we should give everyone a member of Congress a $40,000 deductible, and then see what they think about, what they think about imposing these on. But I mean, we have gone down that path, and essentially that's what happened with the ACA. And in fact, some of what just happened, right, what we just received in the American Recovery Act is the did I say that right, or is it called something else? It's called the Recovery Act, right? Is basically giving people of lower wages, even higher income people, limits on how much they're spending in their premiums, and getting them access to the silver plans and the gold plans, which have better deductibles. But nonetheless, that's the place as you said, that's like the dominant policy place that we've gone with insurance plan design. And now we're thinking about a lot of other things. So I'll come back to you and then widen this to Mike and the group. But one of the things that just happened, to link this back to the digital health piece, Accolade's been out there doing navigation for a while. We've now seen a couple of other companies, this grand round stock from demand thing. And the guy who ran Livongo and sold it for $1 gazillion, Glenn Toulmin, has just come back with a company called Transcarent. And they said they're going to do basically navigation and center of excellence tiered networks. And they're going to do that, and they're going to go at risk with the employers and basically just come in with a share of savings, and they're going to make the experience much better and better. And a lot of big words said there, but they've had some success in the past. But I'm wondering if employers are going to stop, are going to kind of thinking about giving up on this. Well, we'll put the first 2 to 5 to 10,000 or whatever, onto the patient. And instead, how do we really go after the expensive stuff? How do we go after people with cancer and back surgery and heart surgery and what have you? And are they going to start moving away from that and look for much more aggressive sort of navigation-based interventions? So am I making that up, or is that?
No, I think that's the direction that they will go. And I remember when Accolade first launched 7 years ago, maybe, that was a big focus. And we had several sessions at different conferences. I facilitated a couple with them, talking about this tension between the consumer model and this high touch model in healthcare. So I do think that's the way that it's going to go, but it's slow going. And for now, I think these concierge services are seen as a luxury in some cases, not as a necessity.
Even though, you know, and I don't know the average salary of a Comcast employee, their biggest customer at Accolade is Comcast, you know, and the guy coming to fix your cable TV, I assume it's not pulling down 200 grand a year. Maybe I don't know, given how much cable TV costs, maybe he is. All right. Mike, you were trying to jump in.
Yeah, you know, the timing on this, I think, is very interesting. As Jen said, this goes back to 2000, 2002. I was at Pfizer at the time in the middle of the public affairs and government relations area. So, you know, I had a front row seat at the Grover Norquist's Wednesday meetings. And this was with the HSAs and the high deductibles, this was the brainchild of Grace Marie Arnett. And she carried that through a couple of decades of her career, selling it strong. And for the employers at the time, it was a relatively easy sell because they were trying to get out from underneath the costs of healthcare. And this provided them with some shelter as they diminished their backing of their own employees and convinced them that they were actually doing something good for them, when really what they were doing is trying to control their own costs. So now, you know, we're 2 decades into basically ripping off the employees. And of course, the people who are administering these HSA plans were the same ones who were administering the 401k plan. So these were the financial partners of the big corporations who are saying, this is great. This is going to be terrific for employees. This is capitalism at work, you know. And the truth of the matter is that the whole thing was a big lie. And the only thing that amazes me is that it's taken 2 decades to kind of capture up with it. And this is what I was saying before in terms of leapfrogging. If at the end of the day, what the employers wanted from the very beginning and what truly Grover Norquist supported was to get them out from underneath the financial obligation of being the provider of healthcare in America, which is an historical accident. So if that's what they really want, why in God's name would they fight real hard to prevent the expansion of Medicare for all if it got them out from underneath it? On the other hand, the financial consultants that provided them with these HSA plans and are making money off of it, and other policy elites like Grace Marie who have made a career out of it, they'll fight like hell against it. So it'll be an interesting political battle in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Kim, you must have some thoughts about this, because I've always been going, you know, wouldn't most employers end up paying less? But obviously, the CEOs would end up paying a bit more because you need to raise progressive taxes. But anyway, dive in, Kim.
When we talk about, you know, like with the new stimulus bill, capping how much of your income you can pay on premiums, what we're not really admitting is that premiums have gotten to a point where you cannot make it affordable for most employees unless there are wealth transfers, and you cannot do wealth transfers within an insurance system. That's a tax system. And, you know, we got to be honest about this. If we want to finance healthcare, we're going to have to move away from a premium-based system to a tax-based system that takes money from the people that have a lot of it and give it to the people that don't have much of it. And, you know, maybe Medicare for All will do that, but we don't seem to be doing very well at that in anything that we do. You know, the ultra wealthy are paying less in taxes than they paid before. So we're not very good about getting money from them. So all we're doing is, you know, finding new ways to add to the deficit.
Well, at the moment, right, with the economy and the, you know, we are able to do stuff, you know, the 2 examples, obviously 2009 and the one we've just had, the last year we've just had, where we're able to add to the deficit amazingly and do stuff, but they're all kind of temporary fixes, right? Most of the money going there is either happening quickly, and it's going to get cut back. And even the tax cuts that Bush put in, and then Trump Trump did it, but McConnell and Trump between them did it. They're all semi-temporary, whereas a lot of what's in the Biden Act just now is certainly temporary. But I mean, we're only able to sort of do these big things around money when we're in a real damn crisis, which is, not necessarily Mike would probably argue not the best time to act and plan for your future, but you've got to obviously not let the crisis go to waste. My sense is that, the stuff to go back to what Fard and Kim, you were talking about earlier, is it's going to be really, the way the Senate is set up and the fact that you have to be a, quasi-moderate Democrat to win. Elizabeth Warren didn't get very far and Bernie Sanders got only so far, right, in terms of doing these things, is that if you want to talk about doing radical stuff, which may not seem radical by the Danish, Swedish, German metric of doing things like, Elizabeth Warren was talking about workers' councils on employers and on big companies and wealth taxes, and Sanders was talking about Medicare for all and getting rid of student debt and all this kind of stuff. If you want to do those things and get elected, it's really hard. And then even if you can, get radicalize a moderate, as Mike thinks we might do with Joe Biden, you still got the issue of how do you procedurally get this through the Senate when the way the Senate is set up is that the smaller, whiter states have a massive imbalance of power over the places where people actually live in this country.
Well, so, what Joe Biden needs to be worrying about right now is the Tammy Duckworth example. Just this past week, she showed that, every Democratic senator, any single one of them, if they have a particular issue, they can stall everything from happening by just saying, I'm not going to vote for anything unless you take care of my issue. It's going to turn into chaos pretty soon. I'm very worried about it.
But I mean, even that, right? There are 50 seats, and there are 50 seats in Georgia. And although it was an appalling thing that just happened with, literally yesterday, with the fact that 6 white guys surrounded the bill signing of Governor Kemp, and then the one black representative who showed up was then arrested. And female black representative knocked on the door and was arrested and frog matched out by 4 big white policemen, state troopers. That is going to play. Warnock has to run again in 2 years' time because it was an incomplete seat, and anybody lining up in Fulton County, Georgia, is going to not be allowed to get a drink of water or what. Hope it's not too sunny a day, right? I mean, to me, this is very narrow. That we have a very narrow window of opportunity to do something about this, and you've got to convince those the filibuster, which apparently we only need a filibuster for Supreme Court justices because they're not important, but we do need it for legislation. I don't know.
I want to ask Jen. So in Georgia, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, and several other large employers said, don't pass this voter suppression bill or else they're giving penalties for us. And yet they pass it anyway. Does that indicate that large employers don't really have the power over the legislators that we thought they used to?
I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that. I think it's some of these wedge issues have so much momentum on the right that they just defy any rational thinking.
But will employers put the hammer down, or will they just say, nope, we need these guys for our tax bills and other thing, and we'll just put up with it?
I mean, they're getting tons of pressure from employee groups to take action in these. So I mean, that's yet to be seen. I was listening a few weeks ago to an interview with Microsoft CEO on the Sway podcast about how active their employees are in pressuring them on political contributions. So we'll see.
We'll see.
Bard, I know you haven't jumped in here in a second. What's your thought on that?
Unmute, Fob.
Yeah, so I think what we have to remember here in all these conversations is that as a country, we're in an existential crisis as a country. And the people pushing these voter integrity bills, which is what they call them, are definitely afraid of the demographic tsunami that has been predicted for a long time, washing over the country and changing the way that they have been used to doing things. And so the reason that we have, 200 and I don't know how many bills around voting is because what they saw happen in 2020 was that, frankly, the wrong people were voting for the wrong issues. And Senator Cruz and the people within that group feel that what's at stake here is the character of the American, what America's all about. And so what the ideas of limited government, the ideas of tax breaks for the ultra wealthy, the ideas of very low regulation, has been something that's been pushed for 3-4 decades. And so we can't, I think we can't look at what's happening in this country with regard to these fundamental things without thinking about that context. And so where this is going to come down, I think, is that the Biden administration and senators, if you listen to what they say around healthcare, around the economic issues, around homelessness, around economic insecurity, food insecurity, you have a country that we saw over the last 4 years became more and more pressurized. And then we had the attack on the Capitol. And so what we're looking at here with regard to these changes is that they're no longer kind of technocratic issues. These are issues that are fundamental to whether or not the country as a united body is actually going to survive, and whether or not people within this country, the vast majority of people across all backgrounds, will actually feel that the government actually can do something for them. And so what I think is going to happen with regard to these issues is that they're just going to be rolled over, because there's a focus on, and you hear everybody talking about this from Biden on down, that government has to prove that it can do something for regular people in a real way. And so the stimulus bill was the first thing. The next thing is going to be the voting rights. And then the next thing after that is going to be the infrastructure bill. And and so the final thing I'll say about, and this kind of gets into the digital health space with regard to all of the funding that we've been seeing. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Matthew. The reason we're seeing these $500 billion deals is because the money printing has been so intense. And the money has sloshed into, the investors' pockets and banks' pockets, that they have to take that money and spend it on something. And so they have to figure out across these industries, whether it's financial services or healthcare, where can they make bets for the future? And they're making these bets. So what I would say is that, I think we have to think about that context and that history as we talk about these issues, because I think that we're at a point where a lot of people have decided, and this is not just on the Democratic side, this is also on the Republican side. When you saw Romney, talk about childcare, there's just a realization that if something is not done that's big, that we're simply going to have a country that is not livable. And so that is the existential crisis that I think we face as a country, and the reason that you're seeing these very large and very significant actions being taken. And I think the filibuster is just going to be trashed, and they're going to roll over it, and they're going to do what they feel like is necessary, because on one side, it's this existential crisis around what the country is going to be like for the future. And on the other side, it's an existential crisis to whether or not there's going to be a country. And so I think that's what we have to remember.
I'm glad you're going after the small topics there, Thad. but no, it's true. And look, and we have got one example, right, where the government's actually got something right. And I think, whether Trump can claim, success for Operation Warp Speed, and whether how much that was the government versus the ability of, Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and the rest to get their act together on the vaccine production side, so vaccine creation side. Obviously, they were somewhat lucky in that it was such a widespread pandemic that the big reason why it was hard to get drugs and vaccines through the system quickly before is because there wasn't enough people to volunteer, whereas you had the whole population at risk. So you could, as Mike will know, you could fill a clinical trial much more easily than you usually could, because it was COVID and everyone was at risk and it was widespread disease. But nonetheless, that worked. And then although the Trump administration tried to delay and screw up as much as it possibly could the vaccine rollout, you put some sensible technocrats like Klein and Slavitt and whatever people in there, it's clearly doable, and we're clearly getting there, and we're in fact way ahead of the Europeans and the Asians. Amazingly, the British have got it right. That's a totally incompetent government. They seem to be doing well. So it blows my mind that Boris Johnson didn't get anything right, but whatever. They have the advantage of having a national health service where they're having a GP, and so they have a natural distribution way, which we don't have. And we've had some issues obviously with that and scheduling and getting people into, we're doing it in parking lots via public health rather than doing it through a primary care network because we don't have a primary care network. But we got that one example. Yes, I've got to show a lot more. There is a big question, and I want to go back to what Mike said about Medicare for all and whether it comes back up and what we do about whether in one of these bills we get the expansion of Medicare to 60 or whatever as an interim step. There's a big question as to whether, even if you could get government to work, even if, it was shown that the government, we became like the German government, everything happened efficiently or whatever, is that enough to move any or enough people on the right to get a break in the Senate and cause get the Romney, Liz Cheney, quote unquote, moderate pro-business Republicans to detach from the crazy Trump or white supremacist Josh Hawley bunch? I mean, is there enough that the government could do if it proved itself right? And is the stimulus package and the checks going out enough? Is the recovery from COVID enough? Or Mike, what do you think is the mechanism by which we get to a kind of Medicare for all thing? How do we get there from, given the situation that Fard very eloquently laid out?
Right. I mean, I think Fard is absolutely right. What some historians use as a vehicle for discussing things like this is the issue of cultural levers. So when they would look at a Medicare for all, it wouldn't be so much for Medicare for all on its own. It would be what are the cultural implications of taking that step? If America could take that concrete step, what would be the message that would carry with that? One thing would be equality. Another thing would be a broad discussion of rights. Another thing would be, how does one manage social determinants in order to provide a healthy environment and a healthy prospect and future for human beings? So there's a lot of, as a lever, both from an economic standpoint and as an equalizer, but also from a cultural standpoint as emphasizing that it is possible to act on one's values. It is possible to align, at least in this area of practice, with values. It would mean a lot. Now, the other thing I'd say, and I think Fard suggested this as well, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, I'm banking in terms of predicting a lot on understanding Biden. And the reason I feel I understand him is I came from the exact same background, parochial background, Catholic schools, a little younger than him, but not by much. And the thing we hated the most were bullies. And we were taught to be nice, to have a long fuse. But if you got us to a certain point, we were taught to punch a guy in the face. So I think Biden is sort of at that point in his life. And I think he's basically been sitting back and saying, go ahead, push me, push me, push me, push me up against the wall, and you'll see how tough I am. And I think an expression of that toughness is going to be eventually that he basically says, I'm going to do what I want to do and screw you. So I think the filibuster is the initial indicator of that. If he doesn't push on the filibuster, then he's going to do nothing. But if he pushes on that filibuster, I think there's a lot of stuff that could flow in the future, next year or two, as a result of it.
When employers and large unions come out in favor of Medicare for all, then I think we have a chance for it. But until then, no.
I kind of agree with Kim usually, but I'm thinking that, again, Ford said something very interesting, which is about the demographics of the country. And there's some question about, border counties in Texas and the Hispanics voting for Trump when they voted for Clinton and before. And there's some little wrinkles here, but it's pretty clear to anyone who looks at a demographic chart that you've got more and more, a relatively shrinking white elderly population that is the core of the Republican Party. And you've got a lot of, younger not that much younger. What was the Hitler joke video about the election that Hitler was upset because he put together a coalition of whites in militias and whites not in militias, and yet they still lost. You know, you've got a lot of sort of extremism, some of which is coming up in some of these stochastic terrorist shootings that we've seen, and a lot of it's come up in, you know, the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys and all the rest of them, the Oath Keepers, you know, who were clearly planning that January the 6th attack, and would have, you know, had they got at Pelosi and got at Pence, God knows what would have happened. So you know, that's an issue which is going to roll, but that demographic isn't enough to like solve us in the next 2 to 3 years. And we still have the issue of as Kim, you know, pointed out, the Senate being, I pointed out the Senate being, you know, unequally distributed, but also that in terms of population access, but also, you know, now incredibly clear to see which with the weird exception where, you know, you get a good voter turnout like Georgia, where, you know, the smaller states and smaller, more rural states have incredible sway and have a different ideology. So, you know, we're also in a moment where no one right now is caring about the money, caring about the deficit, caring about the taxation, you know, and that's got to obviously change somewhat for Medicare for all, because, you know, you've got to have, as Kim said, the unions saying they want to get out of it, the employers saying they want to get out of it, and a social movement. So you see the beginnings of the social movement. I'm kind of more with Kim than with Mike. I don't see it happening quietly, but nonetheless, I think, you know, there is something to be said for the psychology of you know, the president and powerful members. And if, you know, if Biden loses, you know, his fuse blows, he gets in touch with Manchin and Sinema and the rest of them and says, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to, and you get to the point where we start saying we're going to extend Medicare to people 60 and over. At least you then start saying, well, if you're going to extend it to people who are 60, why not? It doesn't cost you a lot more to give it to people who are 50 or even 40, you know, who don't have employer coverage. And once you start doing that path, then, you know, those employers, especially those low wage employers, lower, you know, not the Googles and the Goldman Sachses, but the, you know, the sort of the Comcast and down from there, you know, the people, the school districts and whatever, the state governments can start saying, well, why can't we put the rest of our people into Medicare for all as well? So I can see it kind of trickling that way instead of rolling over.
And the Medicare for all argument serves to shift the conversation toward that, even if it's not the ultimate solution. But it makes some of the things that you just mentioned, like expanding Medicare for folks that don't have employer coverage, seem really much less radical than they were a few years ago.
No,
but I think what Kim says is absolutely right, that you're talking from a standpoint of cultural shift, you're talking about shifting over to a tax-based system. And that, you know, that's a cultural change for America, right? But let's say, for the sake of argument, at least incrementally, stepwise, we're willing to make that shift. What I'm saying is that would change the whole thing about America. That would modify predatory capitalism, and that would begin to open the conversation of what other things ought to be covered. Like Jen said, you know, we already got a couple of counties who are willing to actually hand out a check and establish minimum payment for everyone. So, you know, it wouldn't take but 1 or 2 steps to really get the ball rolling right now, I think.
Cynically speaking, if they do Medicare for all or even a public option, no one is going to benefit from that before the 2022 elections, and probably not before the 2024 election. So it doesn't buy the Democrats anything. They, you know, going to Mike's point, they've got to do voter rights in order to survive the 2022 and 2024 elections. Yes. And then if they get a mandate, then they can do things like Medicare for all. But they've got to survive these attempts in the state to restrict other voting rights. Otherwise, they're going to be out, and the Republicans will get rid of their filibuster and do whatever the hell they want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wrote a piece, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, where I said that healthcare was actually going to be the clever, if the Republicans were clever, this would be their wedge issue, because if they got rid of the healthcare, if they got rid of the uninsured issue and they went to a comprehensive universal-based system, right? A lot of the fire and energy behind the Democrats, and the reason that, you know, middle-aged white men with, you know, in in the suburbs and in the rural areas with relatively insecure income and relatively insecure work history, they might be attracted to vote Democrat for something like that, right? They might be attracted to say, well, if I vote Democrats, then the healthcare, I get my healthcare covered, I can get it down to a national system. And most I remember the Sarah Cliff doing some interviews in Kentucky after Trump won, asking these people what they wanted for their healthcare system, and they wanted no premiums and no copays. And that sounds remarkably like, that sounds remarkably like a tax-based Canadian or British system to me. But it didn't. But I was wrong, because in fact, when you look at it, there wasn't enough of that kind of scared pro-national healthcare voter who would otherwise vote ideologically Republican, who came over to vote for that stuff. So I'm unsure as to whether that moves, that you get enough of the social movement around that you need, which means that you have to go back to Kim's point and saying, well, we need to fix voter rights so that you can vote in Georgia if you live in Fulton County without waiting for 8 hours, in the freezing cold or the sun, without and no one be able to give you a glass of water or whatever. We have to fix that, which is clearly a big problem. And then even so, we may get 50, 51 seats. We have to go at the filibuster. We leave. We're at risk of the Republicans coming in and turning it all over. And we're also at risk of the Supreme Court, which, don't forget, now has 6 conservatives on it, saying that they don't approve of turning over the filibuster, or they don't approve of the next expansion of Medicare or whatever it is. And we haven't even heard back yet from them about the Texas versus California, the attempt to overturn the Supreme Court over the ridiculous notion that the individual mandate, because it was no longer a tax, means the whole bill has to go down. So there's a lot of sort of pieces of the puzzle here, right, for the politics to play out for us to get to Medicare for all. But I think what both Mike and Fard have sort of been on at is correct. This is about the future of the country, and it's a massive, big wedge issue. I'm just surprised that the right hasn't taken it out, because if they did, if you look at the UK, everyone's agreed that healthcare is a national thing. It's not a debate. The National Health Service runs the whole thing. Most other countries, Germany, elsewhere, there's a national universal healthcare system which everyone is taken care of. Once that's done, then you can go off and have a right-wing government, because why not? There's no issue about, if you accept that we're going to keep, you can be right-wing on a bunch of other issues on immigration in Europe and God knows what else, because no one's going to be worried. And you can actually you can tell a lot of lies about how much more money you're going to have for the NHS, and then you can have them do very right with things like the UK leaving the European Union. Anyway, that was my rant. I'll shut up. We have about 10 minutes left. Are there any other issues? Very small piecemeal issues that we want to raise? We've been talking about the big picture stuff today.
I can't believe we've gotten this far, not talking about Prince Harry, talking about digital health, for God's sakes.
So this is a big fun. I don't use it. It's better. The Better Up company is doing it. This isn't a digital health company. This is a sort of performance coaching company. They're not a mental health company like a Ginger or a Lyra or a Meru or a Silver Cloud. They're I don't know. Jen, have you got customers who use Better Up?
I don't think so, but you're right. They're a little bit of a different version. They're not a pure mental health play, even though his participation in it was framed that way.
But that's because the average press people didn't know what was going on. They knew that Meghan said that she was, she had mental health issues, and they assumed it was something to do with that.
Yeah, it struck me as a little bit missing the point, because there are so many organizations out there really trying to close the gaps in terms of access to real nuts and bolts, just basic mental health care. And yeah, I don't know that much about Better Up, but it's not that.
Actually, my wife had them as a benefit of her last company, and she was the benefits person. I don't know if she hired them or not, but they are, they're kind of like performance coaching. So they're kind of like, I always joke that Roger Federer, Michael Lewis had a great podcast about this. He said, he was talking about coaching and how important it was. He said Roger Federer, and Roger Federer and Djokovic and, these great teams, they have like 15 coaches each, right? They have a nutrition coach and a sports coach. So the people who need coaching the least get the most. And the people who actually, who could use coaching about all manner of things at the bottom, don't get it. And something like a Better Up is an attempt to, obviously for the benefit of employers, to improve their people's performance about a bunch of stuff. And it may route them into mental health, but they don't seem to have the mental health. It wasn't focused on mental health. It was focused more like on performance issues and resilience and stuff like that. than it was on, you know, depression or anxiety. But there is a ridiculous amount of money, well, ridiculous, a huge amount of money gone into people like Ginger and Lyra and others who are on that sort of depression anxiety thing. And there's an interesting company last week which got funded called Happify, which
Happify Health.
Happify Health, yeah, by them. And you know, obviously you can weigh in here, Fudd. And their basic thing is trying to replace therapists with machines, right? Getting people to use tools and services that are automated to deal with, you know, especially depression and anxiety, which are the two big ones.
Mm-hmm. There is a need for, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, you were saying?
I was going to mention there is a need and a desire for this broad spectrum of mental health solutions, you know, everything from mindfulness and just dealing with daily stress all the way to, you know, clinical and when people are in crisis mode. And the coaching is a huge conversation. One of my closest friends started a company called Imperative that is scaling peer coaching. And that's really gaining a lot of ground too. So there's a big need for all of these different types of services. Todd?
Yeah. So in terms of the you know, the Prince Harry stuff, you know, I didn't get a chance to look at Better Up in terms of what they do, but reading the announcement about his hire, it seemed like Better Up was looking a little bit at what's going on in this digital mental health, wellness, well-being area, because it's such a growth area for not just, you know, in the United States it's been a big deal, but overseas in the United Kingdom it's a big deal, those kind of things. And one of the things that I've been watching over the last 6 years is the acceleration of companies like Ginger. I remember when Ginger first came out, right, Matthew? I mean, it was like this check engine light for mental health with these algorithms, and then they changed over to digital mental health with counseling, and then COVID-19 happened and their business exploded. So you're seeing, you know, all these companies in the wellness space. What Happify Health is doing is they're actually developing digital therapeutics along with pharmaceutical companies such as, you know, Sanofi and others to accompany the medications. And so there are certain therapeutic categories where, you know, that's important. So I've seen that company kind of rise. So, and getting back to Prince Harry and getting a job, which is interesting.
Yeah,
you know,
poor guy doesn't have to get a job and now has to quit, leave his country, get a job. What a terrible family.
What happened? You know, he was a prince. But, you know, but it just seems like, you know, he's seen up close based on what the interview, you know, the issues around suicide and mental illness. And I think the key thing he realized is it doesn't matter how privileged you are, how much money you have, you know, mental health affects everybody. And so I think this is an opportunity for him to focus on those issues in a more concrete way. But mental health and digital health, you know, has been exploding over the last year. And I don't think it's going to subside after COVID because we're seeing huge mental health problems. You know, I think they're just going to, obviously they're going to continue. And I think that's why Better Up is in a good position to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to Afghanistan. Soldier, you know, we know that on the far end, right, there's a lot going on in using, like, I just put a tiny bit of dribbles of angel funding into a company called Mindbloom, which is doing telehealth-based ketamine, which, you know, and there are people experimenting with psilocybin and mushrooms and God knows what else to figure out, could you get at serious mental health, you know, PTSD, schizophrenia, these and deep depression using these pharmaceuticals. That's going to coming to be a big deal. The state of Oregon just legalized the psilocybin and magic mushrooms, you know, and trying to figure out how to use it as a medical treatment. So I think there's going to be a lot in that area. But that's only a few people, right? Although they're very expensive people. You get to the next chunk, which is that we've seen. The reason Ginger's going through the roof and Lyra and these others is that, I mean, the Jess DeMassa on WTF Health interviewed Russ Glaster, CEO of Ginger. They're up 3 times in revenue and usage in 2020, and they were already up 3 times in 2019 over that. And the number of people reporting depression and anxiety symptoms in America has gone, you know, is also about tripled, right? We're up 40%. Now, when we can all go out and have a beer and, you know, travel around and go to sports stadiums and get rock concerts, maybe that number goes down, but at least, you know, people now realize what a screaming big deal it is, and that you can do something good about it using a combination of machines like a Happify and counselors like a Ginger and psychiatrists when you need them like a Lyra brings in. And there are even people on the we joke about the $500 million for Roe and the money going into hims and hers, but there's a company called Cerebral, which has been growing crazy just in the last year, simply by delivering a combination of counseling and generic medication, SSRIs, at a pretty low price, sort of below $100 a month. And to me, we're about to see, that kind of treatment almost become kind of a consumer good. And I think that talking about changing America, I don't know, I came here late, but I was always kidding that, Woody Allen had a therapist and what have you. When I grew up in England, I didn't know, the stigma of going to a therapist or having a mental health treatment, was enormous. Just, I'd never heard anyone doing it, right? You sucked it up, you just stiff upper lip. I suspect Kim and Mike, you guys are closer in age to me than to our younger colleagues on the phone, but that was probably more like what it was, when we were growing up. And now I think the fact that, the millennials and Gen Y folks think this is a natural thing to do, right? You take care of your mental health in a different way. Everyone believes in that. And it's very strange to me that both, Prince Harry's an Englishman, but both, if you think about the sort of meditation calmness bit, Calm and Headspace, both started in California, and for that matter, Big Health, which has Sleepio for sleep, and what's they have an antidepressant one as well. I forget, Daydream, something. Anyway, whatever, all run by Englishmen. So the country which exported colonialism and violence to the world has now decided that we're going to fix mental health.
And people
also
love an English accent.
Sorry, Jen, then Mike.
And people love an English accent on their meditation app.
That's the answer. Sorry, Mike.
And remember, in this space, you're competing with the absence of services in many areas. If you take a look at mental health services on college campuses, they usually run from 9 to 4 and aren't open on weekends. So, if you're going to provide online services, that's better than nothing. And that's why it's been able to grow so rapidly, especially at a time when society is more stressed out than ever.
Matthew, since you brought up age, a quick mental health story. I'm old enough that one of my early mentors was involved in the first negotiations about adding mental health to major medical coverage. And the reason that it was added at 50% was because the American Psychiatric Association believed that it was important for patients to pay 50% so that they would get the benefit from the services. So it tells you how much the mental health field has moved on in the last 50 years.
Right.
We're back to high deductible health plans, right? Oh, fantastic. All right, well, we're nearly out of time. So it's been this has been a big conversation with some little dips into some of the current stuff, but really, really exciting. What a great chat. Let's just go around the horn, find out what everyone is hoping for, expecting, looking for, think might happen in the next couple of weeks. So I will start with you, Mike.
Well, I would say watch for the tone of Biden. For any of you who watched the press conference yesterday, you may have picked up a moment where he was being challenged on his approach to the border questions. And he basically asked the rhetorical, are you asking if I'll apologize for not allowing children to be snatched from their mothers? No, I'll never apologize for that. And then he said, are you asking me if I'll apologize for taking minors out of the mud, sitting on the other side in Mexico and rescuing them? No, I'll never apologize for that. So that's the kind of tone I'm talking about. This guy is ready to say, push me, and you'll see what I'm made of. And I don't think if he decides to move, he's going to apologize.
Jen.
Oh gosh, there's so much going on. I think, as many have said, the voting rights issue has got to be the number one thing. We cannot let stuff like what just happened in Georgia go on. This is just so fundamental. And it just still blows me away that it's such a partisan issue. Like, people in America should be able to vote. And I hope that we get some really good movement on that.
Kim.
Well, of course, I'm waiting to see if the Ever Given gets out of the Suez Canal. Well, more accurately, I'm interested to see what kind of memes are generated by it, because they're pretty funny ones coming out already.
Absolutely. Fun.
Yeah, so I'm looking at, you know, with all of the with the infrastructure bill coming up and these other bills, one of the things that I think we're going to hear more and more about is inflation, and and the deficit, and taxes. So those three things, I think, in terms of blunting any additional momentum to do various things, I think those three are going to be very powerful. And the financial markets, frankly, with the bond issues and the bond yields, and I'm not sure if you guys are watching that, that's kind of a signal from the market that they want more fiscal discipline. And it's going to get harder and harder for policymakers to ignore that, given what that means for the stock market. So, so from a healthcare perspective and infrastructure and all these things we're talking about, I think that pressure is going to continue to ratchet up. And I think that's going to have some impact on what people feel is possible to do in this particular moment. So we'll see.
You're on mute, Matthew. Oh, still on. There you go.
How do I manage to keep on screwing this up after all these years? I'll wrap with my point. I have a very personal point. Next week, California is just to drop the age on April the 1st of being able to get a vaccine. So I'll be like Mike, and I don't know if Kim's on that. Maybe Jen, you're not old enough, Jen. You have to come up with a fake ID, but in a couple of weeks you'll be all right.
I already got it.
What?
A fluke on the wait list, stopped by San Francisco General a day, a freezer broke, and they had 300 extras, and they told me and my husband to get in line.
All right. Well, I will not be jumping the queue like Ms. Benz there, but I will be getting on next week, so I'll be reporting back on all that. But that's the end of THCB Gang for March the 26th. I want to thank, great conversation. I want to thank Kim Bellard from Cincinnati, Mike Magee from the Wilds of Connecticut, Jen Benz from San Francisco, and Johnmar from New York City. This is Matthew Holt signing off, saying thanks very much for watching. We'll be back same time, a different day, back on a regular day, Thursday next week. We'll have another lineup to discuss whatever the hell went on in the next crazy week of American healthcare on THCB Gang.